all over the country, there are people in having terminal cases of cancer or AIDS, who are given, for example, huge doses of chemotherapeutic agents, which force them to be nauseous, to be unable to take food, which then leads rapidly to their dwindling away because they can't eat. Now, it's well established that marijuana counteracts this nausea. And in the few cases where it's permitted, which it's done illegally, remarkable benefits accrue. Is it rational to forbid patients who are dying from taking marijuana as a palliative to permit them to gain body weight and to get some food down? It seems madness to say we're worried that they're going to become addicted to marijuana. There's no evidence whatever that it's an addictive drug, but even if it were, these people are dying. What are we saving them from? So that's an example of a highly irrational official government position on at least some parts of drugs. We could argue, case by case, molecule by molecule, but at least some parts of it are clearly irrational.
As a footnote to what you just said, it might be noted that 2 months ago, a 70-year-old grandmother in California was raided in her own kitchen cooking marijuana cookies to be given to AIDS sufferers. And she's facing 5 years in prison. Quite a term for a 70-year-old grandmother, I would say, and indicating the irrationality that you just pointed up with respect to marijuana as medicine.
At the heart of science is an essential balance between two seemingly contradictory attitudes: an openness to new ideas, no matter how bizarre or counterintuitive, and the most ruthlessly skeptical scrutiny of all ideas, old and new. This is how deep truths are winnowed from deep nonsense. The collective enterprise of creative thinking and skeptical thinking, working together, keeps the field on track. Those two seemingly contradictory attitudes are, though, in some tension. Consider this claim: as I walk along, time, as measured by my wristwatch or my aging process, slows down. Also, I shrink in the direction of motion. Also, I get more massive. Who has ever witnessed such a thing? It's easy to dismiss it out of hand. Here's another. Matter and antimatter are all the time, throughout the universe, being created from nothing. Here's a third. Once in a very great while, your car will spontaneously ooze through the brick wall of your garage and be found the next morning on the street. They're all absurd. But the first is a statement of special relativity, and the other two are consequences of quantum mechanics, vacuum fluctuations, and barrier tunneling, they're called. Like it or not, that's the way the world is. If you insist it's ridiculous, you'll be forever closed to some of the major findings on the rules that govern the universe. If you're only skeptical, then no new ideas make it through to you. You never can learn anything. You become a crotchety misanthrope, convinced that nonsense is ruling the world. There is, of course, much data to support you. Since major discoveries at the borderlines of science are rare, experience will tend to confirm your grumpiness. But every now and then, a new idea turns out to be on the mark, valid, and wonderful. If you're too resolutely and uncompromisingly skeptical, you're going to miss or resent the transforming discoveries in science. And either way, you will be obstructing understanding and progress. Mere skepticism is not enough. At the same time, science requires the most vigorous and uncompromising skepticism, because the vast majority of ideas are simply wrong, and the only way to winnow the wheat from the chaff is by critical experiment and analysis. If you're open to the point of gullibility and have not a microgram of skeptical sense in you, then you cannot distinguish the promising ideas from the worthless ones. Uncritically accepting every proffered notion, idea, and hypothesis is tantamount to knowing nothing. Ideas contradict one another. Only through skeptical scrutiny can we decide among them. Some ideas really are better than others. The judicious mix of these two modes of thought is central to the success of science. Good scientists do both. On their own, talking to themselves, they churn up many new ideas and criticize them systematically. Most of the ideas never make it to the outside world. Only those that pass a rigorous self-filtration make it out to be criticized by the rest of the scientific community. Because of this dogged mutual criticism and self-criticism, and the proper reliance on experiment as the arbiter between contending hypotheses, many scientists tend to be diffident about describing their own sense of wonder at the dawning of a wild surmise. This is a pity, because these rare exultant moments demystify and humanize the scientific endeavor. No one can be entirely open or completely skeptical. We all must draw the line somewhere. An ancient Chinese proverb advises, better to be too credulous than too skeptical. But this is from an extremely conservative society in which stability was much more prized than freedom, and where the rulers had a powerful vested interest in not being challenged. Most scientists, I believe, would say better to be too skeptical than too credulous. But neither is easy. Responsible, thoroughgoing, rigorous skepticism requires a hard-nosed habit of thought that takes practice and training to master. Credulity, I think a better word here is openness or wonder, does not come easily either. If we really are to be open to counterintuitive ideas in physics or social organization or anything else, we must grasp those ideas. It means nothing to be open to a proposition we don't understand. Both skepticism and wonder are skills that need honing and practice. Their harmonious marriage within the mind of every school child ought to be a principal goal of public education. I'd love to see such domestic felicity portrayed in the media, television especially. A community of people really working the mix, full of wonder, generously open to every notion, dismissing nothing except for good reason, but at the same time, in a second nature, demanding stringent standards of evidence, and these standards applied with at least as much rigor to what they hold dear as to what they are tempted to reject with impunity. Thanks for watching.
Every cell of each plant and animal contains genetic information coded onto the DNA molecules. The model represents...
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say that space is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about? Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat, and that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland, a land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles. We all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. "Hello," says the three-dimensional creature. "How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension." Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So, when the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before, to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, for heaven's sake, what's happened to you? And the poor square has to say, well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up. And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it. And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube. We can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself and equal length. That makes a square. Move that square in equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand, casts a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in third grade classrooms as two squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a three-dimensional object in two dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The three-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in two dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension in the projection. Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a fourth physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those three directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a fourth physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a four-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in three dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in three dimensions of a four-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's two nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in four dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So, you see, while we cannot imagine the world of four dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager,
every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. We were hunters and foragers. The frontier was everywhere. We were bounded only by the earth and the ocean and the sky. The open road still softly calls. Our little terraqueous globe is the madhouse of those 100,000 millions of worlds. We who cannot even put our own planetary home in order, riven with rivalries and hatreds, are we to venture out into space? By the time we're ready to settle even the nearest other planetary systems, we will have changed. The simple passage of so many generations will have changed us. Necessity will have changed us. We're an adaptable species. It will not be we who reach Alpha Centauri and the other nearby stars. It will be a species very like us, but with more of our strengths and fewer of our weaknesses. More confident, far-seeing, capable, and prudent. For all our failings, despite our limitations and fallibilities, we humans are capable of greatness. What new wonders, undreamt of in our time, will we have wrought in another generation, and another? How far will our nomadic species have wandered by the end of the next century, and the next millennium? Our remote descendants, safely arrayed on many worlds through the solar system and beyond, will be unified by their common heritage, by their regard for their home planet, and by the knowledge that whatever other life may be, the only humans in all the universe come from Earth. They will gaze up and strain to find the blue dot in their skies. They will marvel at how vulnerable the repository of all our potential once was, how perilous our infancy, how humble our beginnings, how many rivers we had to cross before we found our way.
For the last many decades, I've worked with Keith Stroop and Alan St. Pierre of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of the Marijuana Laws, to try to change drug policy in the United States and elsewhere in the world. I really believe that the marijuana laws are a terrible injustice. They make no sense scientifically, ethically, legally, or any way. They cost a fortune to enforce, and we incarcerate hundreds of thousands of people who've done nothing else but possess or distribute marijuana. Maybe it's because I'm a child of the 60s and marijuana has been such a positive part of my life. I've never seen it as being addictive, having spent weeks and months and days of my life and years without using marijuana in any form. For me, it's a kind of a sacrament. You okay, Leo? For me, it's a kind of a sacrament, something that should be used wisely and in the context of a loving family existence. And one of the tragedies of prohibition is that it makes people lie so much about something they shouldn't be lying about. I'm really proud of the fact that my children were the last of their friends to experiment with any kind of drugs, because we never lied to them about drugs, and because when we did tell them about substances that we think are dangerous, they believed us because they knew we could be trusted. So I'd just like to say that as former president of the NORML Advisory Board and as a lifelong activist, hoping to see the marijuana laws changed in my lifetime, that, you know, anything that's used responsibly, in moderation, and as a normal part of life, not as a hidden, secret, criminal enterprise, but something that's done in the context of the family. You know, our family prefers marijuana to alcohol. There's a place for alcohol too, but there's no reason why adults shouldn't be allowed to do something which not only does not harm themselves or others, but is a way to enhance the beauty of life, the beauty of eating, of listening to music, of being with friends and family, of being with the one you love. There's really no limit to the possibilities as long as it's done within the context of a healthy personality and life. And so that's why I've spent so much of my time working to change the marijuana laws. I don't think it's right that middle-class people like me can be free to do what we want, where other people who don't have our resources can see everything they've worked for taken away from them for the use of something which is certainly not as harmful as tobacco or alcohol.
This is a mutual admiration society tonight. But let me point out the deep gratitude that we have to Kendrick Fraser, because in one profound sense, the skeptical inquirer is the heart of our movement. And his long, hard work over the years has given us a tremendous role and impact in this country and worldwide. This convention has had a good deal of attention in the national media, and I've been looking at the local attention in Seattle, and I shudder at some of the attention, because they seem to often emphasize what I consider the frivolous. One report tonight said that we were debunkers, skeptics, negative critics of ufology. And it's true, of course. We've examined with great scrutiny the claims of abductions, as we did last night and during today. And we have examined over the years a wide range of claims. I think if you look at the pages of the Skeptical Inquirer, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of claims, from psychic phenomena and faith healing and levitation and spontaneous combustion and astrology. I won't read the whole litany because every time I do I get depressed. But okay, all right, fine. So that's our role as gadflies, to keep alive the sense of critical inquiry. In a free market of ideas, it's important that the scientific critics and the skeptics have a role, and there would be a great disservice to this country and indeed throughout the world if only the pro-paranormalists had their say, and the paranormalists are never questioned. And so that is our role. It's the Socratic mission that we're continuing, but we also have a very deep positive role, and I think that is often overlooked. In our dinner tonight, we were remarking about the sense of wonder in science and the sense of awe. Who needs these paranormal fantasies that are spun out of human imagination when, in contrast, the universe itself is so exciting? Particularly as one launches into outer space and probes the vast universe, and also into inner space, into life forms. It's that positive aspect. And our speaker tonight, Carl Sagan, surely stands out as one of the leading proponents of the scientific outlook and the scientific method. He's Mr. Cosmos, as we know, because of the cosmic vision. And science does have, I don't like the term vision, it's in quotation marks every time I use it, but there is a cosmic outlook that science provides, and it competes with the metaphysical and the spiritual and the paranormal views of the universe. Carl Sagan is truly a Leonardo man of thought and action. Has that term been used to describe you, Carl? But it's really true. A Leonardo man, because you've accomplished in so many fields. Professor of astronomy and space sciences and director of the Laboratory for Planetary Studies at Cornell University. You also played a leading role in the Mariner, Viking, Voyager, and Galileo spacecraft expeditions to the planets. Carl Sagan is known for his work on the massive greenhouse effect on Venus, wind-blown dust as the explanation of the seasonal changes on Mars, the early faint sun paradox, the organic aerosols on Titan, the origin of life, and the long-term consequences of nuclear war on Earth. But he's performed so many other tasks beyond the academic. He served as chairman of the Division of Planetary Sciences of the American Astronomical Society, president of the Planetology section of the American Geophysical Union, and chairman of the Astronomy section of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And for 12 years, he was editor-in-chief of Icarus, the leading professional journal devoted to planetary research. He is also co-founder and president of the Planetary Society. Dr. Sagan is author and co-author or editor of more than 20 books. His most recent books with Anne Drynan, his wife, who is here today, is Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, A Search for Who We Are. And there are two more in the offing, one next year and one the following spring. I don't remember the names, but they seem very exciting indeed. And of course, his great television series, Cosmos, became the most widely watched series in the history of public television. Dr. Sagan received the Pulitzer Prize, and he will receive tomorrow night the Isaac Asimov Award from the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. I think that we can say that his major contribution today is that he is, in the public mind worldwide, the leading exponent of the scientific outlook and the scientific method, and that in a very positive sense. He's not simply a critic of the pseudosciences from astrology to ufology, but is defending the profound role that science has or should have in world civilization, and there is often an insufficient appreciation for that. Now, we in PsyCop are very grateful that he's been a long-standing supporter, that over the years he has, in his writings and in his talks, constantly talked about the need for a skeptical inquiry. It is a great pleasure indeed to introduce to you as our keynote speaker, Dr. Carl Sagan. Thank you, Paul. Ken, I'm very flattered by those words. I am myself an opponent of the idea of heroes on the grounds that there's always the sense that the heroes are off doing impossibly great things that the rest of us can't do, and therefore, in a way, justifies our not doing anything. It's a sort of anti-democratic ideal, and so I wish, Ken, you would give my thanks to your friend and tell her that heroes, if they were ever here, are gone, and it's a good thing. I'm very pleased to have been associated for a long time with PsycUp. I must say, when the Skeptical Inquirer arrives, I always take it home from the office and pour through the pages with some sense of delight about what new misunderstandings will be revealed in its pages. I don't mean that the articles misunderstand, but they reveal misunderstandings. And I'm always amazed that there's still another area that I've never thought of. Crop circles. Aliens have come and made perfect circles and mathematical messages and so on in wheat. Who would have thought it? Or they've come and eviscerated cows. On a large scale, systematically. Farmers are furious. I'm just always impressed by the depths of inventiveness that the new stories that are debunked in Skeptical Inquirer reveal, but then on more sober reflection, it seems to me that the stories are fantastically unimaginative. That compared to the stunning, unexpected findings of science across the boards, they have a kind of dreariness to them, a lack of imagination, a human chauvinism to them, a reflection of people who imagine that what pops into their head can be more stunning than what nature has already provided. And so in every case, I always have this second thought about that's all they can imagine extraterrestrials doing, making circles in hay. I want in this talk to cover some aspects of the science, parascience, pseudoscience discussion, and I want to be sure to leave time for questions. There are microphones in the aisles. I always find that the question period is by far the most interesting, for me anyway, the most interesting part of the talk, because by and large I've often heard the talk before. And so I hope you will feel free to ask questions on anything that's on your mind, whether I've mentioned it or not in the talk, in the question period. If I can speak personally for a moment, I was a child in a time of hope. I grew up when the expectations for science were very high, 30s, 40s. went to college in the early 50s, got my PhD in 1960. There was a sense of optimism about science and the future. I dreamt of being able to do science. It came about, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I was a street kid. I mean, not homeless. I had a nice nuclear family, but I spent a lot of time in the streets as kids did then. And I knew everything. I knew every bush and hedge and street light and stoop and theater wall for playing Chinese handball and all of that. But there was one aspect, for some reason, of that environment that struck me as funny, as different. And that was the stars. You know, even with an early bedtime in winter, you could see stars. Okay, what were they? They weren't like hedges. They were different. And so I asked my friends what they were. And they said, "They're lights in the sky, kid." Well, I could tell there were lights in the sky, but that wasn't an explanation. I mean, what were they? Little electric bulbs on long black wires, so you couldn't see what they were held up by. I mean, what were they? Not only could nobody tell me, but nobody even had the sense that that was an interesting question. They looked at me funny, you know. I asked my parents. I asked my parents' friends. I asked adults I knew. None of them knew. My mother said to me, "Look, we just got you a library card. Take this card, get on the streetcar, go to the New Utrecht branch of the New York Public Library, and get out a book and find the answer." That seemed to me a fantastically clever idea. And so I did. I went there. I asked the librarian, I was very young, I can remember looking up, for a book on stars. She said, "Sure." Was gone a few minutes, brought one back, gave it to me. Eagerly I sat down, opened the pages, and it was about Veronica Lake. And Clark Gable. And so I went back and explained that it was not easy for me to do, that that wasn't what I had in mind at all, that I meant like real stars. And she thought this was funny, which I felt it humiliating. But anyway, she went and got the right kind of book. And I took that and opened it and slowly turned the pages until I came upon the answer. It was in there. It was stunning. The answer was that the sun was a star, except very far away. The stars were suns. If you were close to them, they would look just like our sun. And I remember I tried to imagine how far away from the sun you'd have to be for it to be as dim as a star. And I didn't know the inverse square law of light propagation. I had not the ghost of a chance of figuring it out. But it was clear to me that you'd have to be very far away. Farther away probably than New Jersey. And the idea of a universe vast beyond imagining swept over me. And it stayed with me ever since. It was an exhilarating feeling, a sense, which I later in life recognized, a sense of awe. And when later on, it took me several years to find this, I realized that we were on a planet, little, non-self-luminous, going around our star. And so all those other stars might have planets going around them, and if planets, then life, intelligence, Brooklyns, who knew? The diversity of those possible worlds, they didn't have to be exactly like ours, I was sure of it. Seemed to be the most stunning thing to study. And I didn't realize that you could be a professional scientist. I had the idea that you'd have to, it'd have to be a, salesman, and my father said that was better than the manufacturing end of things. And I would do science weekends and evenings. It wasn't until my sophomore year in high school that my high school biology teacher revealed to me that there was such a thing as a professional scientist who got paid to do it. So you could spend all your time doing it. It's a glorious day. Well, it's been my enormous good luck, just born in the right time, to have had, to some extent, those childhood ambitions satisfied. I have been involved in the exploration of other worlds in the most amazing science fiction sense. We actually send spacecraft to other worlds. We fly by them, we orbit them, we land on them. We control the robots and make them do things, dig, and it digs. Determine the chemistry of that, and it determines the chemistry. And for me, the continuum from childhood wonder and early science fiction to professional reality has been very smooth. It's never been, oh, gee, this is nothing like what I had imagined. Just the opposite. It's exactly like what I imagined. And so I feel enormously fortunate about that. And science is still one of my chief joys. The popularization of science, the communication of not just the findings but the methods of science, seems to me as a result as natural as breathing. I mean, after all, when you're in love, you want to tell the world. And so the idea that scientists shouldn't talk about their science seems to me bizarre. Now, there's another, just speaking personally, another reason why I think popularizing science is important, why I try to do it. And it's a foreboding I have, maybe ill-placed, of an America in my children's generation, or my grandchildren's generation, when all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, when we're a service and information processing economy, when awesome technological powers are in the hands of a very few, and no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues, when the people, I mean the broad population in a democracy, when the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or even to knowledgeably question those who do set the agendas, when there is no practice in questioning those in authority, when clutching our crystals and religiously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in steep decline, unable to distinguish between what's true and what feels good, we slide almost without noticing into superstition and darkness. That worries me. And I don't think that we have adequate protections against that. I don't think this is just a kind of fantasy. There are reasons to worry. And you will recognize that PsyCop plays a sometimes lonely but still, and in this case the word is right, heroic role in trying to counter some of those trends. We have a civilization based on science and technology. And we've cleverly arranged things so that almost nobody understands science and technology. Now that is as clear a prescription for disaster as you can imagine. It's a combustible mixture of ignorance and power. And while we might get away with it for a while, that mixture, sooner or later, is going to blow up. The powers of modern technology are so enormous, I'll mention in a minute an example or two, that it's insufficient to just say, well, those in charge of those powers, I'm sure, are doing a good job. This is a democracy, and for us to make sure that the powers of science and technology are used properly and prudently,
we ourselves must understand science and technology. The predictive powers of science, some areas of science at least, are awesome. And they are the clearest counter-argument I can imagine to those who say, oh, science is situational. Science is just the current fashion. Science is the promotion of the self-interests of those in power. Surely there is some of that. Surely if there's any powerful tool, those in power will try to use it or even monopolize it. Surely scientists, being people, grow up in a certain society and reflect the prejudices in that society. How would we imagine it to be different? So scientists have been nationalists, and scientists have been racists, and scientists have been sexists. But that doesn't undermine the validity of science. That's just a consequence of being human. So, imagine so many areas we could think of. Imagine you wish to know the sex of your unborn child. Now, there are several approaches. You could, for example, do what the late film star who Annie and I both admire greatly, Cary Grant, did before he was enacting. And that is, in the carnival or fair, suspend a watch or a plumb bob above the abdomen of the expectant mother. And if it swings left to right, it's a boy, and if it swings forward back, it's a girl. And he got it right one time in two. And of course, he was out of there before the baby was born, so there were never any angry customers who said he got it wrong. And being right one chance in two, that's not so bad. I mean, it's better than, say, Kremlinologists do. But if you really want to know, then you go to amniocentesis or to sonograms. And there, your chance of being right is 99 out of 100. It's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than 1 out of 2. If you really want to know, you go to science. Or, suppose you wanted to know when the next eclipse of the sun is. Science does something really astonishing. It can tell you a century in advance where the eclipse is going to be on the Earth and when, totality to the fraction of a second. Think of the predictive power implied in that. Think of how much you must understand to be able to say when there's going to be an eclipse so far in the future and where on the Earth. Or, and it's essentially the same physics exactly, imagine launching a spacecraft from the Earth, like the Voyager spacecraft in 1977. And 12 years later, Voyager 1 arrives at Neptune within 75 kilometers of where it was supposed to be, not having to use the mid-course corrections that were provided. 12 years, 5 billion kilometers on target. So, if you want to really be able to predict the future, not in everything, but in some areas, there's only one aspect of human scholarship, of human claims to knowledge, which really delivers the goods, and that's science. Religions would give their eye teeth to be able to predict anything like that well, and think of how much mileage they would make if they ever could do predictions like that by any method other than science. Now, how does it work? How come it's so successful? Science has built-in error correction mechanisms. Because science recognizes that scientists, like everybody else, are fallible. That we make mistakes, that we're driven by the same prejudices as everybody else. And so there is self-correcting machinery built into the structure of science. There are no forbidden questions. Arguments from authority are worthless. Claims must be demonstrated. Ad hominem arguments about the personality of somebody who disagrees with you are irrelevant. They can be sleazeballs and be right, and you can be a pillar of the community and you can be wrong. It's not, being a sleazeball does not guarantee that you're right. But the correlations are very weak. If you take a look at science in its everyday functioning, of course you find scientists run the gamut of human emotions and personalities and character and so on. But there's one thing which is really striking to the outsider, and that is the gauntlet of criticism which is considered common, de rigueur. So the poor graduate student at his or her PhD oral exam, subjected to a withering crossfire of questions which even sometimes seem hot, sometimes often seem hostile, from the professors who have PhD or failure in their grasp. And the students naturally are nervous, who wouldn't be? And they've prepared for it for years. But they understand that at that critical moment, they really have to be able to answer questions. They have to anticipate questions. They have to think of, where in my thesis is there a weakness that someone else might find, because I sure better find it before they do. Because if they find it, and I'm not prepared, I'm in deep trouble. You take a look at scientific meetings with people yelling at each other and the chairman trying to call for order. You find university colloquia in which the poor speaker has hardly gotten 30 seconds to present what she or he is saying, and suddenly there's questions, interruptions from the audience. You take a look at the publication conventions in which you submit a scientific paper to a journal, and it goes out to anonymous referees whose job it is to say, did you do anything stupid? If you didn't do anything stupid, is there anything in here that is sufficiently interesting to be published? What are the deficiencies of this paper? Has it been done by anybody else? Is the argument adequate, or should you resubmit the paper after you've done the actual work that you are here speculating on? And so on. And it's anonymous. You don't know who it is. You have to rely on the editor to send it out to experts who are not too cruel. This is the everyday expectation in the scientific community. And those who don't expect it, even good scientists who just can't hold up to the criticism, are in deep trouble. Why do we put up with it? Is that we like to be criticized? No scientist likes to be criticized. Every scientist feels an affection for his or her ideas and scientific results, like children. And somebody attacks them, you feel protective. Wait a minute, this is a really good idea. Don't attack it. But that's not the way it goes. The idea is that the ideas that don't work, throw them away. Don't waste any neurons on what doesn't work. Devote those neurons to new ideas that better explain the data. Be willing to surrender your own ideas. There is a reward structure in science which is very interesting, which is that our highest rewards go to those who disprove the doctrines of the most revered scientists. There's a bonus for proving the greatest among us wrong. So Einstein is revered not just because he made so many fundamental contributions to science, but because he found something that Isaac Newton missed. And Isaac Newton, surely the greatest physicist before Albert Einstein. Now think of what other areas of human society have such a reward structure in which we revere those who prove that the fundamental doctrines that we have assumed are wrong. Think of it in politics. Think of it in economics. Think of it in religion. Think of it in how we organize the society. It's exactly the opposite. There we reward those who reassure us that what we've been told is really right and don't have any concerns about it. And that's why we've made, or it's at least a fundamental reason why, we've made so much progress in science and so little in these other areas. Another key aspect of science is experiments. We experiment. Scientists do not trust what is intuitively obvious because intuitively obvious gets you nowhere. That the earth is flat was once obvious. I mean, really, obvious. Obvious. Go out in a flat field and take a look. Is it round or flat? Just, don't listen to me. Go prove it yourself. That heavier bodies fall faster than light ones was once obvious. That blood-sucking leeches cured disease was once obvious. That some people are naturally and by divine right slaves was once obvious. That the earth is at the center of the universe was once obvious. You're skeptical? Go out, take a look. Stars rise in the east, set in the west. Here we are, stationary. We see them going around us. We're at the center. They go around us. The truth may be puzzling. It may take some work to get to. It may be counterintuitive. It may contradict deeply held prejudices. It may not be consonant with what we desperately want to be true. But we are not the measure of what's true. We have a method. And that method helps us determine not absolute truth, only asymptotic approaches to the truth, never there, just closer and closer, always finding vast new oceans of undiscovered possibilities when we have made tiny forays into the island on this great sea of unknowing. Experiment, cleverly designed experiments are the key. Many decades ago, in the 20s, there was a dinner at which the physicist Robert W. Wood was asked to respond to a toast. This is the time when people got up, made a toast, and said, okay, now you respond. And nobody knew what they'd be asked to respond to, so it was a challenge to quick-wittedness. And in this case, the toast was to physics and metaphysics. Now, by metaphysics was meant something like philosophy, truths that you could get to just by thinking about them. Wood took a second, glanced around him, and answered along these lines. He said, the physicist has an idea. The more he thinks it through, the more sense it makes to him. He goes to the scientific literature, and the more he reads, the more promising does the idea seem. Thus prepared, he devises an experiment to test the idea. The experiment is painstaking. Many possibilities are checked. Sources of error and noise are suppressed. The accuracy of the measurement is refined. At the end of all this work, the experiment is done, and the idea is shown to be worthless. The physicist then discards the idea, frees his mind, as I was saying a moment ago, from the clutter of error, and moves on to something else. The difference between physics and metaphysics, Wood concluded, is that the metaphysicist has no laboratory. We are fallible. We cannot foist our wishes on the universe. Let me say just a little bit again, just recap and maybe another couple of points about why is it so important to have widely distributed understanding of science and technology. For one thing, it is the golden road out of poverty for developing nations. And developing nations understand that, because you have only to look at modern American graduate schools in mathematics, in engineering, in physics, to find in case after case more than half the students are from other countries. I think this is good. This is something America is doing for the world. But it is a clear sense that the developing nations understand what is essential for their future. What worries me is that we may not be so clear on the same subject. Another aspect has to do with the dangers of technology. If you, it's astonishing that almost every astronaut in low Earth orbit has made this point. I was up there, they say, and I looked towards the horizon, and there was this thin blue band. That was the Earth's atmosphere. I had been told we live in an ocean of air. And there it is, so fragile, such a delicate blue. I was worried for it. In fact, the thickness of the Earth's atmosphere compared to the size of the Earth is in about the same ratio as the thickness of a coat of shellac on a schoolroom globe is to the size of the globe. Now that's the air that nurtures us and almost all the life on Earth, that protects us from deadly ultraviolet light from the sun, that through the greenhouse effect brings the surface temperature of the Earth above the freezing point. Without the greenhouse effect, the entire Earth would be plunged 10 or more degrees below the freezing point of water, and we'd all be dead. Now that atmosphere, so thin and fragile, is under assault by our technology. We're pumping all kinds of stuff up into it. And you know about the concern that chlorofluorocarbons are depleting the ozone layer, which certainly is the case, and that the carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases are producing global warming, a steady trend amidst fluctuations produced by volcanic eruptions and other sources, and who knows what other challenges to the atmosphere that we haven't been wise enough to foresee yet. Now this is an area, and there are many like it, but this is one that I've been working on, and so I'm sort of concentrating on it, in which the inadvertent side effects of technology, nothing we intend to do, the side effects can challenge the environment on which our very lives depend. Now that means that we must understand science and technology. We must understand in a very clever way long-term consequences, not just what's tomorrow, not just the bottom line on the profit and loss column for the corporation for this year, but 10, 20, 50, 100 years in the future. The timescales that we have to think are different. If we absolutely stop all chlorofluorocarbon and allied chemical production right now, the ozonosphere will heal itself about 100 years from now. And therefore, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren must suffer through the mistakes that we've made. That's a second reason. Dangers of technology, we must understand them better. Third reason, origins. Every human culture has devoted some of its intellectual, moral, and, how shall I say, poetic resources into trying to understand where we come from. We, our particular group, us humans, the planet, the stars, the sun, the universe, where does it come from? What is it all? Where is it going? Now, we happen, through no merit of ours, just by sheer luck, to be alive at a time when the answers to these questions are beginning to be revealed. These are goosebump questions. These are questions that you've got to be made of wood not to be at least a little interested in. Let me say a word about science and pseudoscience. I think there's a kind of Gresham's law that applies here, in which the bad science drives out the good in the popular imagination. And what I mean is this. If you are awash in lost continents and channeling and UFOs and all the long litany of claims so well exposed in the Skeptical Inquirer, you may not have intellectual room for the findings of science. Your wonder quotient is fully occupied. There hasn't been room for science to sneak in. The culture, in one way, produces these fantastic findings of science, and then in another way cuts them off before they reach the average person. And so people who are curious, intelligent, dedicated to understanding the world may nevertheless be, in our view, enmired in superstition and pseudoscience. And you could say, well, they ought to know better, they ought to be more critical and so on, but that's too harsh. It's not very much their fault, I say. It's the fault of a society that preferentially propagates one set of things and holds to a very small community another set of things. The last way for skeptics to get the attention of these bright, curious, interested people is to belittle or condescend or to show arrogance towards their beliefs. They are not stupid. It's a problem it's a problem of the society more than anything else. And if we bear in mind human frailty and fallibility, we will have compassion for them. So, for example, I have lately been thinking a lot about alien abductions and false claims of childhood sexual abuse and claims of satanic ritual abuse in the context of recovered memories and so on. I think there's a lot of similarities, interesting similarities between those cases. I think if we are to understand any of them, we must understand all of them. But there's one thing about it that worries me, and that is the tendency, sometimes explicitly, more often implicitly, to say all these claims of childhood sexual abuse are silly and pumped up by unethical therapists and all of that. Well, in yesterday's paper, a survey of 13 states reports that 1/6 of all the rape victims reported to police are under the age of 12. And this is a category of rape that is preferentially underreported to police for obvious reasons. Of these girls, 1/5 were raped by their fathers. Now that's a lot of betrayal. That's a lot of people. And we have to bear that in mind when we approach people who say they have an eating disorder and their psychiatrist convinced them that they were abused in childhood. It does not follow that they're wrong because the logic seems strained. A lot of people have been sexually abused by parents or those who served in loco parentis. People are not stupid. They believe things for reasons. Let me give another example. In the 19th century, it was mediums. You'd go there and they would put you in touch with dead relatives. These days, it's a little different. It's called channeling. But the basic and spiritualism was, I guess, back in the 19th century, part of the medium business. What this is basically about is attempting to deal with human fear of dying. And I don't know about you guys, I find the idea of dying unpleasant. I would just as soon not die. I recognize I have to. In fact, twice in my life I came very close to doing so. I did not have a near-death experience. Sorry to say. But I can understand anxiety about dying. About 12 to 14 years ago, both my parents died. We had a very good relationship. I was very close to them. I still miss them terribly. And I wouldn't ask much. I would sort of like 5 minutes a year. Tell them how the kids and the grandchildren are doing and how Annie and me are doing. And I know it sounds stupid, but I'd like to ask them, is everything all right with you? Just a little contact. For that reason, I do not guffaw at women who go to their husbands' tombstones and give them a chat every now and then. I can understand that. That's not hard to understand. And if we have difficulties on the ontological status of who it is they're talking to, that's all right. That's not what this is about. This is about humans being human. In the alien abduction context, I've been trying to understand and talk up the idea that humans hallucinate, that it's a common part of human nature. Yes, under conditions of sensory deprivation or drugs or deprival of REM sleep, but also just in the ordinary course of existence. I have, maybe a dozen times since my parents died, heard one of them say my name. Just single first word, Carl. I'm not surprised by it. I miss them. They called me by my first name so much during the time they were alive. It had great psychic roots, so my brain plays it back every now and then. It doesn't surprise me at all. I sort of like it. But it is a hallucination. And if I was a little less skeptical, I could see how easy it would be to say, "Ooh, where are they? They're here somewhere. I can hear them." Raymond Moody, who is an MD, I think, an author who spends lots of time writing innumerable books on life after death, actually quoted me in the first chapter of his latest book, saying that I heard my parents calling me Carl, saying, "Look, even he believes in life after death." Missing the whole point. And if this is one of the arguments from chapter 1 of the latest book of the principal exponent of this, I don't think he has a good case. But still, suppose I wasn't steeped in the virtues of scientific skepticism and felt the same way about my parents, and along comes somebody who says, "I can put you in touch with them." And suppose they're smart and they found out something about my parents in the past, and they're good at faking voices and so on, darkened room and incense and all of that. I could see being really swept away emotionally. That's not hard to understand. Now, would you think less of me in that case if I had no background in skepticism, no idea of why it's a virtue, but had the sense that it was grumpy and negative and rejecting everything that was humane. Wouldn't you think that there's something wrong with rejecting my openness to the medium con man or woman? What I'm trying to say is that the one deficiency which I see in the skeptical movement is an us versus them. A sense that we have a monopoly on the truth. Those other people who believe in all these stupid doctrines are morons, and they're, or worse. And that's it. If you're sensible, you listen to us. If not, to hell with you. That is non-constructive. That does not get our message across. That condemns us to permanent minority status. Whereas, an approach which from the beginning acknowledges the human roots of these problems, understands that the society has arranged things so that for very good reasons, that skepticism is not well taught. By very good reasons, I mean very good reasons for the protection of those in power. If skepticism is well understood, then who is the skepticism going to be applied to except those in power? Those in power do not have a vested interest in everybody being able to ask searching questions. If we understand that, then we have compassion to the abductees and those who startled come upon crop circles and believe that they are supernatural, and then we have a much better chance of succeeding. I think it is key for us to make science and the scientific method more attractive, especially to the young, because that's a battle for the future. And as I look through this audience, I see a very nice mixed distribution of ages, which I think is a very positive and hopeful sign. The sign of a dying cult is everybody is as old as I am. Now, science involves an amazing, seemingly self-contradictory mix. On the one hand, it requires an almost complete openness to all ideas, no matter how bizarre and weird they sound. As I walk along, my time slows down, I shrink in the direction of motion, and I get more massive, excuse me, Ken. That's crazy. On the scale of the very small, the molecule can be in that position, but it is prohibited from being in any intermediate position. That's wild. But the first is special relativity, the second is quantum mechanics, and like it or not, that's the way the world is. And if you only say, well, that's ridiculous, you will be forever closed to the major findings of science. On the other hand, science requires the most vigorous and uncompromising skepticism, because the vast majority of ideas are simply wrong. And the only way you can distinguish the right from the wrong, the wheat from the chaff, is by testing. It is no fun, as I said at the beginning, to be on the receiving end of the testing. But it is the penalty we pay for having so powerful a tool as science.